Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today, you and I are going to be taking a look at a sponsored video from Minimal Audio. They asked me to create a video about how I might use current in a song. And so what I did is make a song that is 95% current only. Current is their flagship synth, and just about everything in this track that I've started, it's not done yet or anything. We have a intro and main section that is pretty much all made from the synth with different patches and stuff. And so I could go and break everything down, but what I think I'm going to focus on are the snare, the main snare, and then maybe, if depending on how time goes, maybe with the kick. But let me know in the comment section if you would like to see me cover the other stuff. This is going to be very loud, but let's go ahead and take a listen, and let's see what this synth has to offer. Loudness warning. Yeah, so just about every sound in here was made from current. There's a couple of overlapping things that I would want to change or whatever in the future, but let's go ahead and talk about how I made this snare. There is a patch on here, and I will quickly kind of break that down because I think that, just having a sense of context will be important. But I think what I'm going to do is probably start over from scratch and then show you how we can get that to be super loud. So first off, let me figure out which one it is. I probably should have labeled this, but let's see what we got going on here. There it is. So all in all, the most important thing within developing snares is that you have a fundamental and you have usually some kind of white noise layer if you're synthesizing things. And it depends on what kind of snare sound you're going for. But as you can see, I'm not using a wavetable or granular engine. It's literally just the sub oscillator, and then we have the blue noise. And so really the name of this game is to create a very simple sound, kind of like this. And then we could utilize Minimal Audio stuff, their effects primarily, to make this really slap. Yeah, isn't that crazy? So yeah, if you kind of already know about snares and stuff, distortion, filtering, morph EQ to just kind of do some boosting and whatnot, and then we've got some reverb on the sides, and then 2 instances of compression are really going to pull that up. But now that we kind of have a general understanding of that, let's try to make one from scratch to where you can kind of follow along within the video. And again, just for context, this video is sponsored by Current, but as you can hear, they make great sounds. So yeah. So my default of this is actually a Reese. Turn it off. We don't need that. What we want to hop into is this section here. I love that they have a sub oscillator, because what this means is, for one, I don't have to go in here and make like a pitch envelope or whatever. I'm totally fine just using the knock and stuff, which we'll get into in a second. But then you have another layer here that we can utilize the factory noise on blue, which is what I use, and go from here. So there is a little bit of setup that goes along with this in order to get it right, but don't fret, because once you have it figured out, then it's not that big of a deal. So the first thing that we want to do is turn both of these down. And the reason why is because whenever you make something percussive, you want the sounds to be short. You don't want to be like, the initial hit of this with a knock already is already doing the doom. But if we cut it off with an envelope, then we can make that be a lot more short. So what we'll do is grab this, and we're going to take a look at how long the decay is, and maybe shoot for something that's like 130 milliseconds, 140. And then we'll just apply this to the level, kind of like so at like 0. Maybe a little bit longer. And then let's adjust the knock and decay to where we have something that's punchy, but not still like, it needs to hit the fundamental. I'm hitting A sharp. So with this is already a transient that we have, and it's not necessarily the most like, you know, punching thing ever, but it is enough that we could utilize distortion and multiband compression to kind of extract. Now, the second piece to this is something that I've learned from my peers. The thing with this is that if you have the snare going at the same time as the noise, if you have the sub oscillator going at the same time as the noise and the transients overlap, sometimes that can create unwanted characteristics of the sound. And so in order to get a similar thing of what I've done, we actually need another, not an envelope, but a curve here to be able to offset the timing. And it's a little bit of an inconvenience, but if you kind of know what you're doing and you can go out of your way, then you can get a lot of control, because this main envelope is basically the overall arcing like sound volume master control. So if we have an envelope that's going here and then we have another one that is a little bit offset, then what we can do is apply this to the level of the noise. And so they should kind of overlap almost in very, very fast succession. And so we want to make sure that this is set to 1 shot, and then we want to turn sync off and adjust the rate to where it's fast, and we should have something very simple. I might have to adjust the settings on here, but generally speaking, that's pretty good. Maybe I can make this a little bit slower. And now we've already kind of got something that we're going to be able to work with. Before we start heading over into the effects section, there's a couple of options that we have with this. For one, I know that I didn't touch much, but hop in here and try to change some of these settings when we get back into the effect rack, because it might change the timbre and you might be able to get some other cool stuff out of it. But the other important thing is that because we only have, like, I don't think that there's like a noise wavetable that is that exists from defaults or from their factory stuff. So we really only have the granular engine or the sampler to work with initially for having things like I'm used to doing in other synthesizers and stuff. But that's okay, because one other thing that we can do is create a parallel chain like this and actually create a pseudo third layer with something that would be like a clap. And so if you take a bandpass and you apply this here somewhere around the 1K region, because this is generally where claps lie, and you don't want to be super resonant, but just a little bit, then you can kind of create another layer that might kind of lean into creating a nice tail that kind of peaks around that mid frequency. We can always fix it later, but this is just one workaround that you can utilize that with. So because of that, let's go ahead and listen to how that sounds. Then let's go ahead and just have another layer here all the way up and just turn the mix down. This really shouldn't be doing much, but once we send this into distortion and stuff, then yeah, it's doing things, but it's just very quiet. Okay, so there's not really much to this. We are going to add polar distortion. We're going to drive it really hard. And this is already starting to kind of turn out to be like nice and snappy and stuff. We can turn the auto gain off if we want to try to make it a little bit louder. And if we start to apply the squash here, this is going to bring out the high end of the noise that we have in the first place. And before we move on, grab this little guy and change it to purple or red. Doesn't matter. Either one will work. But as you can see here, whenever we utilize this, we're already kind of extracting, if you will, the high-end stuff. And we can mess around with the distortion types and all that stuff if you want to, but really just kind of, yeah, maybe just a little bit. This is actually going to play a pretty big role, because what we can do is we can push the resonance up just a bit, and this should help. And I don't know if you've heard it or not, but when we turn this off, then we turn it on, there's a little bit extra of the cracking part of the snare that we can utilize to kind of like pull out a little bit more. And so really, once we have something like that, the next piece that we would want to try to maybe focus on is space. And so you can utilize a very small amount of, say, the reverb With this, you kind of want to change the balance over to the left and pull the size almost all the way down and pull the attack down as well. So that way you can create a very short tail. If you want to have a really insane, like long sounding snare, then you can leave this up by a lot more. But changing the diffusion and pulling this down by quite a bit will allow you to have something that's still kind of soft on top, but not so digital. And it should be to the point to where it's barely even noticeable, because again, we're going to be using some other stuff at the end of the chain in order to extract it and make it a little bit more in your face, so to speak. So now that we have that, we've got a fuse compressor over at the end, and let's go ahead and turn that on. And one of the coolest things that I like about this in particular is, for one, I just set it to 6 bands, but like this thing is so easy to use when it comes into making stuff loud. Long story short, long attack, long release, threshold up, ratio up, threshold up, ratio up. And we're already kind of getting something that's a lot more kind of smacky, right? The cool thing about current, especially compared to something like Vital or Serum, respectively, is that we can have multiple instances of the same thing. And so if we do this a couple of times and adjust even the makeup and stuff, really just messing with these 4 effects is going to give us something that's going to be relatively dramatic. And so what I want to do now is I want to mess with this rate here and try to get something that's going to be a little bit more snappy. No, that was a little bit too fast. And so I like the relationship that we have the fundamental on this first. So what I can do is just adjust the curve. So the tail of this is kind of creating this resonance point here. And so we kind of just need to back off of this a little bit more. And then what we also need to do is back off of this. And really, honestly, the most tedious part when it comes to drums is just managing your envelopes. Unfortunately, there's not really a way about it. And I don't want to be one of those people that are like, yo, you need to change this to this o'clock and whatever, because that's not really how you're going to learn. The best way to kind of develop this is to listen to how it sounds, you know, and play Goldilocks. That's pretty good. This is at 350 at the moment. That's too long. That's too short. We're going to go back to that 350 region, and we're going to find just right. The other thing that you can also do that's really important is, for whatever reason, if you need to like cut everything off a little bit sooner, then you can adjust that here with the master envelope. And that's why I like to use this as the stop gate to everything else, because it really helps you control the sound a lot more. And that's the secret to good snares, great snares, whatever. So next up, let's go ahead and talk about the Morph EQ. If you look here, the fundamental is peaking out, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But because of that, the rest of the stuff is relatively quiet in comparison. And so there's a couple of different ways to solve this, but what I'm going to do, and you shouldn't do this on every sound per se if you want it to, but because I'm looking at this and the fundamental is so much higher, what we can do is take a couple of shells and bell curves. And now we can utilize the region from 500 to 2K in order to characterize the sound even more. It's a bit much. Let's be a little bit more broad. Maybe just back off just a little bit. Cool. Now for that extra smack, this is something that I learned from my teachers, mentors, and all that other stuff. But one really cool thing that you can do on here in order to create an extra impact on your transients is to grab an envelope here and to pull this down. And what we're going to do is set this to the resonance of the fundamental. So we'll move the cutoff over here and find where that peaking resonance is. And this unfortunately only works for, you know, whatever key of the snare that you're doing, but you can always key track it if you want to. I'm not going to, because I don't need to do different things, but let's go ahead and take a listen to this. And now what I can do is I can push this a little bit harder. That was a bit much, for just a little bit of extra crunch. If you still need more, then my next suggestion would be to go on a distortion. And now this is kind of getting into a place of like taste and yeah, taste or preference. But we can kind of do this again where we can continue to kind of just squash this and like murder this until it like sounds like it's exploding. Or we go too far and it just falls apart. But that sounds pretty nice. What happens if we do this? And the more that you squash this, the more that you can back off of this. Because what this is doing essentially a lot of times is it is kind of extending or really trying to pull up a lot of the sounds that, or a lot of parts of the sound that are quiet. And so when you do that, it's going to make it seem like the sound is longer. And so if you kind of find this mix behind the two, then a lot of times you'll get into something that works really well. And so now because of that, let's go ahead and make this a little bit more short. So Goldilocks, Goldilocks. Now, one thing with this, I don't know if you noticed or not, but there's some phase rotation in here. And so one of the best ways to try to like make this stay usable is have something like rolling sampler on the outside. So that way, whenever you get one that you like, you can just pull it out kind of like so. That being said, you can just set a recording channel or whatever, or just keep cycling through until you find the one that you like. But that's how I would kind of extract and pull something out like that. But once you have something here, some other characterizations that you can do to make it more fun or to make it a little bit more humanistic is do something like a comb filter, perhaps. You want to be careful with things like frequency shifter in the chorus and all that, because they're going to start to shift the phase that can sometimes pull away from the punch and the transient. But if we take a look at the first one that I made, which I believe is this one, it's a little bit snappier, but at the same time, you got your hybrid filter, morph EQ. I'm only using one instance of distortion here. And really what it comes down to is just look at how short these envelopes are, you know? And so by having that and by squashing it super hard and all that other stuff, there's a lot of different variations that you can get out of that sound. But generally speaking, you know, let's say I wanted this to be shorter. You just got to mess with the envelope. There we go. And sometimes if you hit this too close together in quick succession, then the compressor will not have enough time to reset. And that's why it might sound like it's subdued. If you really want this to be loud, like very, very loud, because I think that this is already peaking out pretty hard. So take a look at this. We're already hitting at -6. The last resort that you can utilize in order to make this even cooler or even like extreme is to actually turn this up. Be careful with this. Be very careful with this. But yeah, even if you boost this by like 3 decibels, it's sending itself into a clipper. So while it is technically getting louder, physically getting louder, I want you to be aware of that. You will not be clipping or peaking into the master, provided that you have the soft clipper or limiter on any of these devices towards the end. So this one has one on here, this one has one on here, but this will blow this thing up. If you set a longer time, then you can make it even more snappy. And like I said, now we're kind of just getting into different means of contextualization and preference given on what the genre needs. But all in all, this is pretty much how I would make a snare inside of Current. It's fairly straightforward, and once you have this, then you can take this and apply it to a lot of other different kinds of drums. But thank you to Minimal Audio for subscribing, or sorry, thank you to Minimal Audio for sponsoring this video. For you, I would love it if you subscribed. And if there's another video, or if you want, maybe if we do this again, let me know what other sound that you would want to hear through that. But once again, the context of this, because even on this, I'm not doing any mixing other than adding a slight amount of convolution reverb. Here's how the drums sound on their own. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.